Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. Today, we're going to be flipping through 3 of the top stories, including what the RINOs will do going into the future, how the debate was way different than people thought it was going to be, and a interesting story talking about the wealth gap and how it's expanding, and how there actually is a solution that is proposed by one side that the other side doesn't necessarily like. And, of course, today we will end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling for me. Let's get into our daily debate. What does RINO even mean anymore? A Republican in name only, right? That's what it actually stands for, or that's what the acronym is supposed to stand for. And yet it gets thrown around so much. I'm fascinated what you see a RINO as, because everybody can have their own definition, and that's not to say that every definition is right. If you say that it's a Democrat who's blah, 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 that's probably not right considering Republican is in the acronym, but I feel like it gets thrown around so much and there are so many different connotations, so I want to know what you think the term actually means. And yes, you can come in with the sassy answers, which is, oh, well, it obviously means this, Alex. Love to hear those. Maybe I can respond. I'm trying to get around to some of the previous comments, but there are a good chunk and I can't always be looking at my phone. So with that said, let's jump into the first article. It comes from AM 740 KTRH News Radio. And this is an iHeart channel. It's the one from Houston. They post things online, and they have a podcast that is indeed connected with this article. And it's very short, so I'm not going to pretend like, oh, this is so breathtaking, the amount of knowledge that they're trying to pour into our heads with this article. No, this is actually more of a staging ground, in my opinion, to actually have a broader conversation. This is a piece that we're going to read a little bit from, and then we're going to actually dive into what's going to happen to the Republican Party. So the first sentence says, quote, "The last 8 years have been full of so-called Republicans, once disliked by the media and Democrats, now siding with them over their own party. These RINOs are already paying a political price for turning on fellow Republicans." Now, let me ask a very, very simple question. If you are a Ronald Reagan Republican, a person who believes in small government, limited ability of said government through regulations, through laws, to materially affect the lives of people, and you believe in a limited tax system, that is obviously included in small government, but a limited tax system to free up the wealth of the nation, allow people to be economically mobile, and also to remove the incentive for the government to spend too much, because then they will be running into high amounts of debt. If you believe all of those things, is the current Republican Party the one for you? Donald Trump, though Biden has run up the debt more, if you remove a lot of COVID spending, they've both added to the debt a very, very good chunk. I would say that they're both pretty much up there. Donald Trump didn't actually necessarily cut spending. He did cut taxes, and he did have a very particular policy in place where for every regulation they put on the books, they try to get rid of 2 regulations, which would be a small government sort of thing. But he's definitely turned recently into allowing some of the systems that have been criticized as big government programs for a long time to stay in place. Medicare, Social Security, and even saying that certain benefits under different plans should be enabled. So this is definitely a change in rhetoric. Does that mean that the RINOs, quote unquote, the Republicans who believe all these things, have actually shifted and they're going more towards the Democrats, or has the party itself shifted? Now, you could make an argument that Donald Trump is just doing what's practical, which is fair enough. Not going to deny that. He's a very practical politician. But you could make that argument to me that he doesn't necessarily care about big government, that he's not trying to get behind it, when he doesn't put someone like J.D. Vance on his ticket. J.D. Vance very well articulates a worldview where government can be used as a cudgel in order to implement your ends and means, or use it as a means to implement your ends, aka the means justify the ends. And that is a particular position that has been held more on the left within the last 30 years in politics than on the right. Democrats are much more willing to say we will use the government in order to fix certain problems. And J.D. Vance is saying the exact same thing, only in maybe a few different areas. The one where they overlap is the tax credit. The one where they overlap a little bit is protectionist economics, though the rhetoric from JD Vance seems to imply that they're actually willing to do a little bit more, but they're all talking about onshoring jobs, and onshoring jobs is great. I'm not trying to hate on any of the policies here, but also that comes at a cost because we have a higher minimum wage here in the United States. We have a higher standard of living. Therefore, we are going to have to pay more for products that are made within the United States. And for some people, that's okay. For some middle class people who are willing to buy American, that's okay. Some people in the lower echelons of American society aren't necessarily able to pay those higher costs, and maybe it actually benefits to have some of those products coming from places where the labor is cheaper, therefore the price of the good is cheaper. These are very complex cases. I'm not trying to whittle them down to one thing. I'm just saying you could probably make a pretty solid argument in saying, well, they do in economics all the time, everything else being equal, this small change may lead to higher prices. Now, there are plenty of other factors, and Vance fully believes that there are actually going to be different levers the government can pull. And even Trump himself believes this because he is trying to implement a 10% tariff, or at least he says he wants to. Now, I say trying to, he doesn't have any power to do it currently. He says that he wants to because he believes that America is being ripped off, which is an America first policy. But guess who implements tariffs? The government. It is done through the executive office. You are putting more power into the hands of the executive, and you're actually expanding the scope of what he is allowed to do. And when I say allowed to do, obviously he can already unilaterally do it. What I mean is for it to become normal as a habit for the president to do. Then again, it's not the first time that we've had large tariffs all across the board, so I'm not trying to pretend as though Trump is 100% unique, but this is definitely a shift in tone and rhetoric since even 2012, even probably 2014 Republican Party. And when you have someone like Vance, who does very well believe that the government needs to be something that we use in order to benefit the people that vote for us, aka a nice little hammer in the tool belt, and they're using it as the blunt object basically to nail in any of those stray nails and try to benefit the United States of America. That is a shift in thinking. And the question always comes back to, did the party leave me behind, or did I change my values when we're discussing what is happening with these RINOs? Because this iHeartRadio network is definitely framing it saying, well, no, these other people are peeling off because they become more Democratic and they have left the Republicans. In some cases, I could see an argument for Liz Cheney being a little bit more neocon-y, especially on the issue of war. This is somewhere where the tables have flipped absolutely, and I actually think that it's a good thing for the party to flip and actually be against getting involved in other wars around the world. I wish the Democrats would have just stayed consistent on it, and then we could have a uniparty of anti-war sentiment rather than a uniparty of maybe we should be involved around the world war sentiment. And that's where you see some of these RINOs, in the quote-unquote terms that the article would be using, flipping and falling back into the establishment or falling in with friendly voices, which happen to be Democrats right now. So if you're defining RINOs as the war hawk class of Republicans, then yeah, they're probably gone from the Republican Party. There is no doubt. But if you're calling a RINO someone who is small government, then I don't even know if some of the Republican Party necessarily falls into that category anymore. Versus if you're saying a RINO is someone who doesn't want to cut taxes, then I think you could basically exclude most of the Republican Party. So you see the normal stratum on which we actually, the best way to put it, let me not use stratum, let me use planes. The planes on which we normally observe things. So say there's a 1D plane, a 2D plane, and a 3D plane, okay? If you are trying to plot where different Republicans are between these planes and trying to assign a certain name to one plane or another. So say the third dimensional plane are the RINOs, the second dimensional plane are the Reagan conservatives, and the third dimensional plane are the populist conservatives. There are so many views that bounce in between all of those that it's hard to truly know what counts as a RINO anymore. And I think the term's also been overused, and that's why we are losing a sense of how powerful powerful that word actually used to be. The term used to be a great meme because it was true. People who were Republicans in name only, they didn't actually care about the values. They were just trying to stay in Washington, D.C. They were playing along with the uniparty game. They were just giving inches here and there, and they were trying to conserve everything in the past, but actually giving up and conceding and saying, okay, we're going to slow the process of change rather than saying maybe this change actually isn't good and we need to stop it and reevaluate. So when you talk about RINOs in that sense, I understand. And I think if you use that form of the word to conserve certain values and saying, let's be clear here. If you're saying a non-RINO is someone who is conserving particular values and willing to actually stop change and reevaluate how any given new legislation, bill, anything of this new sort will actually affect the standard living of an average American citizen, it will change the society as a whole, and therefore try to stop that change and conserve what we have and make sure that it is not broken by this new change. If anybody who is not a RINO falls into that large category, then yeah, I can see why you could call them a RINO and still not necessarily worry about the tax policy, worry about the small government, not using the government as a tool. Even you could avoid a little bit of pro-war sort of stuff as well, because in that sense, that is the broadest version of Republican/conservative, conserving what we have. Anybody who is incrementally giving in and just willing to play along in the game, therefore not being a Republican/conservative, I could see that being a very broad definition of RINO. But I had to create that in order to actually try to apply to everybody within the party. And that is why the word has lost meaning, because they're just calling random people RINOs at this part. Because guess what? The Reagan conservatives are going to say, well, no, hey, you over there, you populist conservatives, you are RINOs because you're Republicans in name only. You actually want big government. And then the populist conservatives are going to tell the Reagan conservatives, well, you play along with the game a little bit too much. Actually, you're RINOs because you don't believe in conserving these values through any means necessary. And then you're going to have the Warhawk type saying, well, actually, all you guys are RINOs because you're not Republicans, and Republicans believe in a strong national defense. The party is displaying so many different faces at this point, it is extremely hard to narrow down what RINO even means. But if we are to use the definition that I outlined, which isn't the ultimate definition, it's just the one that I prefer, that I feel as though covers the most things, people generally fighting for different conservative values, but still falling underneath one umbrella, and then versus the Liz Cheneys who just go along to get along to play the Washington game, just like her father did, I think we could call them RINOs. And I think they will be exercised from the Republican Party. Not in a bad way, and did I say excised from the Republican Party. And not like, oh, they'll be cut out forcefully. They will leave on their own because they do not see the Republican Party actually following through on some of its promises that they believe is extremely important, especially on the willingness to play ball with the other side. And I feel as though there's actually a good place for a party within our system that would say, no, we're not going to play ball quite yet. You gotta concede, and we don't just have to concede on certain issues. You have to concede on certain issues, and also we're just going to hold things up for the sake of holding things up because, one, we have the power to do it, and if we have the power to do it, we might as well use it to ensure that every single thing that goes forward is actually benefiting the American people. And that may be chaotic, and that may be hectic, and people may absolutely hate it, but I do believe that our system was meant to move slowly, or at least not as often, considering back in the day, House of Representative members and Senate members, they didn't spend all their time at Washington. Then again, they don't nowadays, but they didn't spend all their time in these elite circles. They went back to their constituencies a lot of the time, or at least they went back to their home areas because they had businesses, and they would come together maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year. So that needs to be a serious consideration. Do we want a party that continues to go forward, and when I say this, I mean Democrats or Republicans, that continue to go forward and never, ever be willing to stand on their principles and be willing to say, no, we actually need to slow this process down. Maybe we need to halt this and actually understand what is going on. Maybe we need to take the extreme measure of making sure nothing can move until we've actually thought this through, rather than just passing an omnibus bill every once in a while in order to make everybody happy. I feel like there's a legitimate place for that. And I understand, like I said, it will be a little bit hectic and some people won't like it and it will be confusing. That doesn't mean that it is not good. Just because something is hard does not mean that it is not the right way to go forward. I would be very happy if the Democrats did it. I would be very happy if the Republicans did it. I'd be super happy if somehow the Libertarians or even the Green Party got in and they did it and actually caused us to contemplate on these ideas rather than simply going along to get along and make sure that, oh, well, hey, I'm putting a little bit of funding in there for my people and therefore I'll get reelected. These are serious considerations. But that's enough on that one. I've rambled long enough about the whole debate between RINOs, and like I said, we use this article as a jumping point because I didn't go into a single quote after that. If you also want to listen to the podcast that's attached to it, all of the stories from today will be linked in the description below the like and subscribe button. But with that said, let's get into our second article. It comes from Real Clear Politics. Weird no more. Tim Walz, J.D. Vance humanize one another. And this was the takeaway. For me, within the first 5 to 10 minutes, I was shocked. I was like, wow, okay, JD, okay, Timmy boy, I see you guys up there. Oh, I agree. Oh, he's not that bad. Oh, this guy's really nice. I actually think that he's onto something there. I don't agree with everything. They were very cordial. They were playing the game of politics as it was when I grew up. When I saw John McCain saying nice things about Obama, when I saw Obama saying nice things about John McCain, when I saw Romney and Obama up there having a little tit for tat, but also being respectful versus the drama queen mentality of modern politics, which is how can I get the most attention? How can I say the most shocking thing? And it's fascinating. It is fascinating to see the broad appeal that politics has now to people because it is entertainment. And that's not to say that politics should be closed off and it should be something that we don't necessarily pay attention to and it should be so boring that people don't want to watch it, because we do want people to be politically engaged. But it actually goes back to one of my last points, which is when I said that things have to be a little bit more hectic, a little bit more confusing. I'm not just saying that, because chaos is great. It's because you have to put in extra effort in order to actually care about any of these things. You have to put in time and effort to actually think through some of these issues if it's a little bit more chaotic when it's in the Senate. And I don't want politics to be a snap, let me just go watch some cute entertainment moments. I want people to actually have to think about it a little bit, put a little bit of time and effort into understanding their philosophy, their worldview, and bringing a coherent argument to the table. A well thought through argument, even if it is one you don't agree with, will do more to stimulate conversation and actually move us forward than talking points in short little conversations that are completely consist of yelling, screaming, and a little bit of dissing on each side. That will get us not that far. And it's interesting because with the job that I have, I run into people I talk to a lot of people. And it's not to say I'm an expert. That doesn't mean I've talked to every single person in the world. I'm not trying to pretend like that. I don't understand the entire American electorate because everybody hasn't met the entire American electorate. Goodness gracious. So I don't think anybody can truly have the utmost understanding of the quote-unquote pulse or temperature of the American people. But on the ground, a lot of people are much more willing to engage in civil conversation. There are obviously the people who just want to stir up bad TV hits or they want to get some social media views. I've seen those people as well. But a majority of people genuinely approach you when you're talking about something political and genuinely want to have a conversation. Or they do the cordial thing and say, hey, I just really don't want to talk about this. Many more people do that than the people that are absolutely crazy and yelling and screaming and throwing stink bombs during events and everything like this, okay? So we need to remember that when we engage in these sort of conversations, when we talk about politics, we actually want the tone to be much like the Vance-Walz debate. We want it to be cordial. We want to actually engage, and we want to make it a place where people do not feel afraid to say their opinions, and therefore they're willing to come out and have an outright conversation, and maybe they're wrong when they're having that conversation, but allow them to actually develop the argument a little bit, to think through some of these things. And that's what happens when politics is boring. It's not just entertainment and talking points. You actually have to put in that extra little bit of effort. I'm not saying that everybody shouldn't be involved in politics. I think everybody should have the ability to vote. I think everybody should have the ability to have an opinion. And if it's a 5-second talking point opinion, but you really like it, cool, go right ahead. I'm not trying to discourage anybody or say they're not worthy of it being involved in politics. But I think the people that are most involved in politics need to seriously sit down and have a deep understanding of the other side. And why is this important? Because when you have a better understanding of the people you're sitting across from, one, on a practical level, you know how to motivate them, but on a principled level, you understand where the bridges can be, the divide can be bridged and where it can't be. You know where the moving points are and you know what isn't. You understand the fundamental differences versus the superficial things. And that actually allows us to come together, because if you ask a conservative nowadays what the best way to ensure that we have low prices for goods, let's say eggs, they're going to say we need to try to get inflation under control, whether that be limiting the amount of spending, whether that be providing subsidies to egg companies, which wouldn't actually help. But there are a few people who are in the Republican Party who actually want to keep on supporting agriculture versus people in the Democratic Party. They may say something to the effect of corporate gouging. They say that we want to make sure that these companies, like the big egg producers, let's call them Big Egg, they are not gouging the consumer. And what you can understand from both of those is the place where they come together is that they want to help the consumer. The places where they're a little bit further apart is they're identifying different places in the supply chain. They're identifying different core issues, but they understand, okay, we have to come together for the consumer, and maybe we can bridge that gap and say, okay, we're going to have an oversight bill where they have to justify any price increases. Whether or not I agree with this, if you're going for a completely bipartisan solution, it would be something to the effect of, okay, we have an oversight bill where people have to justify increase in prices on a radical level, and we also say that we're going to limit spending on these two programs in order to make sure that we are not actually over subsidizing or over stimulating certain segments of the economy and therefore possibly causing inflation to run away. And let's be clear, that is not a fully fleshed out opinion because I literally just came up with the example in the moment. But the point is that in order to get to those places where you can have those conversations, you have to engage in good faith, you have to have fleshed out your own worldview, and you also have to have a genuine understanding of the other side. And when we just come into yelling matches and we just treat it like it's a TikTok reel or it's an Instagram reel, and we treat it as though it's going to be on the next episode of Keeping Up with whatever you want to put it on, Keeping Up with Trump, Keeping Up with Harris on Hulu, and these are all going to be viral moments and people are just watching for the entertainment value, the 5-second clip, then are we actually ever going to come to a place where you fully understand the other side, or are we just going to a place where you understand a caricature of the other side? Does that actually move anything forward? No. And that's why I was so extremely happy when I saw how boring the conversation was. Now, could both candidates be less conciliatory about what they agree, quote unquote, what they agree on? 100%. I think you could still display your differences with the other person while still being cordial, but I at least respected the tone, even though I didn't necessarily agree with all of the positions that any of them took or how much the other person was agreeing with the other person across the stage. But the era of boring politics is back, baby. Just kidding. It's not going away anytime soon. Donald Trump has fundamentally changed. I take that back. Obama also started the process of fundamentally changing American politics, especially with his social media / star profile as president. But Donald Trump also did the same thing. There's been a fundamental shift within politics. There are people who have literally made their living off of being famous politicians and saying the outrageous thing. I think that we're locked into this for at least another 10 years. And maybe this is a sign that there is an underlying current of calm, gathered, well thought out, cordial politics lying underneath, but it is still lying underneath. And we kind of have to dig it back out if we really want that to be the case. And like I said, the average American person does. At least the people that I talk to, they want to engage in these conversations. They may get frustrated. They may not have a really fleshed out worldview, as sometimes there are issues that I have not spent the hours upon hours of thinking of every nuance of. Trust me, there are a lot of them. If you ask me about New Zealand's economic policies and their tariff policy about exporting XYZ product, I'm not going to be able to give you an in-depth review of it. But I'm willing to engage in that conversation. I'm willing to go into it with good faith and examine whether or not some of those policies may actually be good or bad for the United States. And we all need to be willing to engage in good faith, and we all need to take time to explore it, even if it's hard. And that is the lesson of today. If you haven't figured it out, what is hard sometimes is necessary. Sometimes it's even better. It may be uncomfortable. You may not enjoy it, but it is what we need to engage in, because the harder things, one, will make us much more prepared for any other hard things that come down the pike, but also they give you a little bit of extra perspective. Rather than taking the easy path, taking the hard path allows you to understand, one, where other people are coming from, but two, that, oh, okay, I was simply copping out when I was doing this sort of yelling and screaming before. I didn't actually take time to understand somebody else's argument. It's easy to glide down with the current rather than possibly push back in certain places and actually learn to paddle yourself, because in the end, you'll actually go down that river faster rather than just floating. So that analogy will end that segment, and we will move on to our final article that comes from Common Dreams. U.S. Wealth Gap Report fuels call to unrig our tax code. Now, you know that I have talked about Common Dream articles before. If you have listened to this podcast before, you also know that I've criticized many of their articles. And I'm not going to say that I have a super rosy opinion of this one, but they bring up a very interesting point. So let's actually go in to a report from the Congressional Budget Office. I'll read one of the quotes from it. Quote, adjusted for inflation, the wealth held by families in the United States almost quadrupled between 1989 and 2022, rising from $52 trillion in 2022 US dollars, so it is inflation adjusted, to $199 trillion at an average rate of about 4% per year, the CBO found. Over the 33-year period, family wealth was unevenly distributed and that inequality increased. So let's just take that in, okay? That is a massive increase. That is almost $150 trillion increase in wealth in a 33-year period. That isn't necessarily exponential, but it is very impressive. 4% per year, we would take GDP growth for like that. And then again, you can make an argument that some of that is actually boosted by the natural inflation within our economy, actually pushing up wages and everything like that. But fair enough. They already adjusted it for inflation, so they're at least trying to bring it onto a level playing field. So let's go on to the next part. Quote, in 2022, families in the top 10% of the distribution held 60% of all wealth, up from 56% in 1989. And families in the top 1% of the distribution held 27%, up from 23% in 1989, the office said. The share of wealth held by the rest of the families in the top half of the distribution shrank from 37% to 33% over the same period. Families in the bottom half of the distribution held 6% of all wealth in both 1989 and 2022. So what they're pointing out here is that if you're looking at this right, basically the middle of the distribution went down. The middle class got stripped of a little bit of money. Then the top 10% held about 60%. The top 1% held about 27% in 2022. So basically what they're getting at, and honestly, you can do a little bit more of a breakdown here. The other 9% of that top 10% is holding roughly 33-ish% of the rest of the wealth, which is still a pretty good chunk. And the middle class was essentially stripped here of the wealth. That's what they're getting at, because it fell from 37% of the wealth to 33% of the wealth. And the money is flowing up to the top. I think, one, the fact that it's only grown by, in the top 10%, it's only grown by 4% in both the top 10% and 1% over the course of 33 years. honestly isn't that bad. Now, if you're going to say, well, the goal is to actually have that decrease, then yeah, that's not a good number for you at all. Over 30 years, it's a little bit insane. But also, I think it shows a little bit of stability in the wealth structure of America currently. And if this trend continues, it's not necessarily a good thing. But think about the average living of a person who is in that bottom 6% of holding the wealth. The standard of living has most definitely increased. A person that's on welfare can have 2 cars, they can have a TV. Now, I'm not saying a lot of people do. I'm saying in theory they could. The average person could have just 1 car, a bike, a TV, who actually has a house at this point in their life. Now, then again, not everybody can have a house. This generation is going to have a really hard time finding a house. But these numbers aren't as drastic as they want you to believe, but that doesn't mean that almost 60% of the wealth needs to be concentrated in the top 10%. Now, you may be asking me, well, Alex, how do you plan to change that? Well, it's not through tax policy. And how I would actually ask to change this is there's a wide range of ways that you could address this. And I could propose 2 off the top of my head, and like I said, there are many, many more. 1, provide stock options for every single publicly traded company, for every single employee who works in that company, because then the people who are working on the bottom echelons of the company will actually be more invested. They can build up wealth that way. And maybe you say that the dividends that they would be paid out for stockholders are actually they kept in stock instead, so they're not actually taxed. That would be a complicated one, but I think that could be one way that you actually try to improve the standing of everybody in the middle class. And guess what? It may actually benefit the top percent as well, or at least they're already getting stock options for a lot of their deals. Why not just do it for the lower management as well? That could be a cultural change that we try to implement, because we want the people who work for us to have a little bit more of a buy-in. The second one is another cultural one, where we recenter this idea of giving your money away. Whether or not you like some of the moguls of the past, whether or not you like the Rockefellers, a lot of them did give their money to different institutions, whether it be schools, whether it be churches, or different programs that they cared about in order to help people. Some were to help their own public image, and some were genuinely to help people. And both of these are cultural things that we have to address on the long term, and that is why they're not necessarily as appealing. And like I said, there are thousands of other options. I'm sure there are plenty of other things that people want to do. Throw them in the comment section. If you've made it this far, God bless you. I really appreciate it. Throw them in the comment section, that the solutions that are not just taxing. Because if we strip people of their wealth, 1, they're going to try to run away. 2, they're going to find ways to work around it. And 3, you're actually saying, hey, if you work hard and you make it to the top, even if you do something where you create a company, you basically just sit there, but the company is really, really innovative. The idea was really strong. It adds values to people's lives, whether they like it or not. Whether you, as a person on the outside, likes that they're accumulating wealth is what I mean. Whether you like it or not, if it's something that adds value to people's lives, then that's why the product is making so much money. And even if that person is, quote unquote, sitting around, they have the idea for it. Do you want to actively de-incentivize people from pursuing innovation and possibly getting to that upper echelon to have their money ripped away from them? No, I don't think those are actual ways to do it. And if you are seriously concerned about the people not getting more money distributed to them, maybe we should have a culture where it's actually adored, where it is actually praised when you give money to charity, when you create foundations that help people. All of these sort of things that we used to do, and to some degree we still do. A lot of people in America still give away money. A lot of people who go to church still give away good chunks of money. Now, am I saying that you have to give away all of your wealth and we have to instill that idea? No, but if we have a change in the culture, which will take time versus this instant gratification of, oh, we're going to create a tax policy that will strip them of their wealth, it's an immediate gratification. It doesn't actually change the core cultural values. Rather, we have a long-term play where we realign ourselves to care about the people within our society that don't necessarily have it as good as us. Does that mean that I give 10 cents or $1 to every single person on the side of the street that I see? No. And am I asking everybody else to do it? No. But if there's a charity that you really like, they call you up, maybe take the time. There are people in my family who get letters from random organizations that I didn't even know existed, and they just give money to them in order to help with legal expenses. There have been multiple groups that have just called me up, and I've turned down a few of them because I don't necessarily believe in their message, but there were two that I did. There was one specifically that I gave a good chunk of money to, and there's one on a repeat basis that I give a little bit of extra change that I have in my wallet to because I believe in what they do. And if this is instilled in the people, if this is instilled in the population, and even the people that are poorest among us do it, then if we raise our children correctly, if we instill this as not only something that you're supposed to do, because you want to feel nice, but because it is a cultural, societal pressure, then maybe we will have people actually giving back more. Guess what? Whether you like it or not, Bill Gates gives a lot of money to different organizations. He's trying to give back. He's trying to follow his passions. He's trying to do what he wants to do with his money in order to help people. You may not agree with how he wants to help people, but he's at least doing it. And that is what we need. We need a cultural change. We do not need people who we allow to use the free market in order to accrue this wealth, but then don't care about the people. It's a cultural change. It is not necessarily something that government can just come in and fix like that. So, if you've enjoyed all of these, I'm sorry we were so serious. Let's jump into our daily delight. This one is an adorable video. It comes from Australia. The headline reads, "Heartwarming Vet Care. Perth's Slow Loris receives adorable spa day from Dotting Zoo vets." And it is a absolutely amazing video. They're bringing this guy back from the edge. It feels like he's getting all the attention in the world. It is a little bit sad at first, but I promise you the video turns around. If you want to see this or you want to read any of today's articles, like I mentioned, there will be a link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle @YourDailyFlip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And also on the RSS feeds and at the YouTube channel, on Tuesdays as well, 6 and 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. It's international news that comes out at the same time as the podcasts normally do at noon. So if you want to check that out, come on back. Maybe get your information, your news about the rest of the world very quickly. And it's a little bit more tightly scripted and structured than this is, where I kind of go off the top of the head with the articles as a prompt versus the Twitter tirade, which is truly just off the top of the head, random topics. So there's a nice little arrangement here. And depending on which version you like, you can stick around for any of them. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.